In our last lesson, we discussed the importance of establishing new organizational models that help us achieve DevOps principles. In this video, we're going to discuss important characteristics of organizational models that are conducive to DevOps workflows. We can use these characteristics to evaluate proposed organizational structures to see how closely they match the acceptance criteria for an organizational design. Companies can then select, innovate, and experiment with different models that might deliver on these requirements. At the end of this lesson, you'll be able to describe each of these 7 characteristics. The first characteristic for a model is that the organizational structure must support and promote the mechanics of the DevOps approach and its goals. As a type of lean process, DevOps focuses on shortening lead times and generating rapid feedback. In evaluating an organizational structure, we must ask ourselves whether it is likely to deliver on these objectives. Are there barriers to rapid delivery? For example, are there difficult handoffs between different groups? Are there required sign-offs or approvals that will result in wait time between major processes? Is the flow of feedback frictionless, or does it need to go through appropriate channels? Can teams be autonomous and empowered? Or would their goals conflict with those of the hierarchy that they are a part of? Determining how well an organizational structure will address concerns such as these is paramount. Secondly, the organization must also encourage communication and the free flow of information. In general, this means that communication should be face-to-face and ad hoc, rather than through formal documentation. Silos, for example, tend to encourage communication within the silo, but are rarely effective at establishing lines of communication between silos. Sometimes it's not unlike high school cliques that remain insular and choose not to interact with other groups. So whether or not the organization's hierarchy encourages communication between silos to accomplish the goals of DevOps must be evaluated. Third, the organizational structure must share accountabilities to support the goals of delivering high-quality, impactful software. DevOps requires empowered teams, which in turn requires that the teams be given responsibility of a goal. You should ask yourself, does the organizational structure allow meaningful goals to be passed down through the structure so that teams can own their delivery? Do you have a way to measure and understand how many handoffs occur as teams are trying to deliver value? Do you have approval processes or gates that impact the flow of value? Answering these questions and analyzing the current state of how software is delivered, coupled with aligning on organizational objectives, will help you understand if a structure or organizational change will be needed. The fourth characteristic we should look at involves evaluating the mechanisms related to risk mitigation, compliance, and auditability. Does the organizational structure establish the controls required by the company's compliance activities? For example, SOX, HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, while at the same time providing the flexibility and empowerment for the DevOps teams to succeed. Often, organizations operate with compliance and security teams separate from the development and operations teams. In a DevOps-minded culture, the compliance and security requirements actually become a part of the product and the delivery teams. In functional silo organizations, it can often be difficult to overcome the perceived risk management of keeping these teams and activities separate. However, high-performing organizations have security built in and automated within their pipelines. There are many great examples of this in the DevOps community, including Capital One. Frankly, no one ever thought a financial institution would be one of the industry leaders in this space. Capital One has adopted open source, including giving back to the community by open sourcing their pipeline automation. They have built security into the pipeline and have spoken publicly about how they work closely with their audit and security teams to make sure those requirements are built in. If you want to learn more about what Capital One has been doing, there are a number of videos from their talks at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, which I've included in the resources section of this module. The fifth characteristic to consider is how the organization allows for humane and fair distribution of burdens. DevOps is based on the idea that a development team should not toss its product over the wall to an operations team, which then must deal with the operational consequences. Nor should an operations team so constrain development that it is unable to meet the goals of its users. This principle really should apply to the organization as a whole. Our responsibilities must be distributed such that no group has an unsustainable burden. This helps mitigate employee and team burnout. It's really a way of asking whether the entire organization is motivated by a shared goal, which is ideal, or by conflicting goals, which is not. This concept is also described as you build it, you own it, you improve it. Sixth, the organizational structure should recognize and value the voice of the individuals. Just as individuals in the Toyota manufacturing process are encouraged to pull the fabled and-on cord if they see a problem. For manufacturing, the and-on cord stops production. In software delivery, this can instead be seen as stopping the deployment pipeline. DevOps and other lean practices seek to empower those closest to the action to use their own judgment. Does the structure require that individuals get layers of approval to take action? Or is it flattened in a way that encourages interaction between managers and individual contributors? Do individuals have a voice in decisions? Is their feedback regularly solicited? Seventh and finally, the organization must be flexible enough to support continuous improvement. Can the organization easily reconfigure itself based on what they've learned from feedback loops and shared experience? The structure of the organization is not the only factor that encourages these 7 positive characteristics, but it certainly can be an obstacle. With these characteristics in hand, we can examine some organizational structures and the degree to which they help deliver efficiency and productivity. We're going to keep these characteristics in mind as we explore some common organizational structures in the next video.